hey, from an evolutionary perspective, I have been slowly over time, obviously, survival of the fittest is the key to it all. But going after truth is not connected philosophically to that. Now, you can try and make a connection, but basically, atheistic philosophers are raising the white flag and saying, for our whole deal of focusing on, hey, why do we seek after truth and reason and rationality and logic? How does that make sense from an evolutionary perspective? There would have to be a big jump there to do that, because the evolutionary perspective just gets after survival of the fittest and really propagating the gene pool.
Well, Stuart, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. So I found you guys, I think it was because of the Ask Me Anything. Just kind of went a little viral, and it seems like you guys are kind of doing really well with that. It's super cool. So I've always been interested in like the apologetic sort of thing. You know, I'm a Christian, but I would call myself I know this probably hurts my family members' heads, but a skeptical Christian, right? I'm an engineer. I question everything. So how can you not question your faith? I mean, it's an innate part of what I do. And some days it encourages me. Other days it just, it stresses me out, to be honest, So I think for us, personally, church is a big part of our life and faith is a big part of our life. But I'm not someone who just I'm not that blind faith sort of guy. For me, that's not, I know it works for some folks. It's just not me. But anyway, before we jump into all that, because I really want to get into some of the questions I sent you kind of previously. What's your background? How did you guys start? And, with you and your dad, I know you're pastors at a church, then you have this other thing. So how did all this get started?
Yeah. So we were just on, I don't know if you know Frank Turek. We were just on his podcast last week. And I found out the history last week with that question that Frank asked. I didn't know it was 1981 is when my dad started us. And it was on the beaches of Florida. He was wearing shorts that were hiked up so high it was illegal in 49 states. And he was really kind of the pioneer. He was at least the pioneer of beach apologetics. And there was Sean McDowell. We've talked with him. His dad's name again is Josh McDowell. I think Josh McDowell was around. He wrote that kind of the first big books on apologetics. And so I'm sure my dad took some of his thinking and a few others' thoughts. And just Billy Graham's son-in-law, Leighton Ford, was the first one who just said, Cliff, I see a potential opportunity here. You've got the gifts. Why don't you just go out and start doing this? I'm not familiar with any of it, but I feel like you could perhaps have a gifting in it. And so he just went out and started it in 1981 in Florida. And there was a lot of hippies, a lot of characters, and they would just fire up questions. A crowd would kind of gather, and it really started to get traction when InterVarsity stepped up behind him and had him to every major world or major national university in the country. And you had like the Berkeleys, you had so many of the hyper secular liberal ones where, combos and ideas would fly in a militant kind of way. So that was the 90s, and all the way up to I joined him in 2015, and we actually took a dip in terms of invites, I want to say in 2018. And so he came up to me a couple times and was like, hey, should we pull the plug on this? I mean, we're pastors together. That takes up a lot of time. You started having a bunch of kids. That's going to take up time. And I said, I was like, Dad, hold on. Let's just go a little bit longer. I know we're only getting invites to like 3 or 4 schools, but let's just see. And godsend, like I mentioned, Vinny, I'm not gifted whatsoever on technology, but a total godsend. This TikTok thing fell into our laps. I had a couple guys reach out and say, try it. And I was like, I'm not a high school girl doing belly dancing.
Right.
Why would I ever do this? But the fourth time they asked me to do it, I finally did it. And boom, the first 10 videos went viral. And so I thought, gosh, all right, this isn't hard for me at all. This literally takes our producer in Dallas sends, he's the one who puts up all the episodes on YouTube. And so he just sent me a bunch of episodes and I just clipped them, and it would take me 5 minutes a clip. And I was like, this isn't taking any time and it's all going viral. So that took off, and then that played in and really pushed the YouTube channel, and then the Instagram and the Facebook. So that's how we got started, and that's kind of where it is today. And we get invited by, every day to a new university. But
But we have our church, and so we're going to invest the vast majority of our time in our church. But the nice part about it as well, though, is the ministry plays beautifully into the church in terms of we got new people come into the church first time ever every Sunday now, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, you get a little bit of a celebrity, right? And in a good way, right? You can bring folks. I mean, it's awareness, if nothing else, just awareness of your church, even for the local folks or people that are coming in from out of town. That's yeah. It is amazing with if you hear TikTok and the initial reaction is exactly what you said. You just picture somebody taking a 5-second clip of their food, and then
right,
you figure it's just insignificant little things that why would anyone care about that stuff? But it's just a social media platform, and it I would think it just augments.
Yeah.
It augments whatever you want to show to the populace, and it's good, bad, boring, productive. So, but I used to have that same, I guess, old person. I call myself old person now, kind of like that legacy view on the world with this new stuff, and it's real, and it works. If I always say, like with technology now, you're one tab away from creating a company or just wasting your life just looking at cat videos, right? You're just one tab away. Yeah, you know what I mean? So it's really how you use the technology. But that's a cool, that's I didn't realize it went back to 81. Wow, that's crazy. So these invitations, they're predominantly to universities. Is that the scope of you? Okay.
Right. And a handful of people reached out recently. We're like, you guys get invited to churches? And we get invited to a good amount of churches to speak, fairly small to medium sized, but just recently to some big ones. And so we'll probably say yes to a few of those, but we mainly want to keep it definitely to the university campus. And we do a good amount of debates on YouTube, but not as many anymore, just because our focus is so much more so on the YouTube debates. And we used to be, for 40 years, we were on local TV and TV in random countries. And that was an arm and a leg. And some guys got us on Black Entertainment. Not us. I was not there yet. And that didn't work. And so it's just to your point, exactly right. We are on for not a penny on social media. And I said this, I definitely do not have the gift of prophecy, but this was my one prophetic moment. I said back in 2017 or 2016, I said, let's not shut it down. I promise you, Dad, there will be something that comes around that local TV is, we've never been able to find it. And some guys have stepped up and been very generous to try and get us into different segments on TV. Something will happen. And I did say probably social media of some sort. And sure enough, it's just out of nowhere and the algorithms tripped. And I just knew the content. There's such a need on university campuses and in the empty souls of so many university students, that something was going to connect. And I know so many different groups, whether it's my brother's friends or whether it's friends of friends or a bunch of groups of people will reach out and be like, oh, all my drunk friends just watch you guys on a Friday and Saturday night. And they're all drunk and non-Christians, but that's all they want to do. And so there was some kind of
encouraging though. I mean, that's encouraging that, and I think it just speaks to the fact that we're all kind of in the search for meaning, right? I mean, you look at the news, it seems like, and especially with college campuses, I mean, I think you guys are and I'm sure you're doing this very strategically, getting, trying to share the message, the gospels with folks that are, on campuses, when the predominant message, at least from I'm on the outside looking in, it seems to be very secular, very anti-traditional values. Not only opening the door, as I think, professors in the university should open the door to allow and encourage free thinking and spirited debates and just, whether you believe in something or not is really not supposed to be pushed on you, but more or less, let's explore these ideas. But I think the universities have gotten to the point of where they're, frankly, poisoning, the minds of our young folks with a particular ideology. And I won't advocate for it on either one side or the other, but it's obviously very much one-sided at this point. I just think they should teach us how to think and not here's what you should be thinking. And you guys are kind of, I think, doing exactly the opposite. Like, no, let's talk about these hard issues. Ask me hard questions. And it's been interesting to watch, and I think you guys are probably blowing up for a reason because people are searching for it. Now, have you guys, do you get pushback from the university? It sounds like not. I would imagine, are there some universities that like, hey, we don't want that crap on our campus?
So Columbia back in 2008, I want to say, my dad told me there were a couple big bodyguards or security of some sort at Columbia that called him into their office after he had been invited by 2 student organizations there to speak on their free speech area there at the Quad. But they call him in and they say, "Hey, we've seen you before. Where have we seen you?" And he said, "Oh, we have this Give Me an Answer ministry that we do, so you've probably seen me there." And he said, "Oh, okay, because we also saw a couple cameras, and you better get yourself and those cameras off this campus as quickly as possible." And so they intimidated him, and he respected it. He's not going to disrespect that. At least at this point, he's not. And so he just took the cameras and left. But then we've had a few people reach out after he's told that story and said they didn't have any kind of jurisdiction or rights to do that, actually. Actually, you could have even pressed charges. We would never press charges, but you could have pressed charges on the school of some sort because you had been invited. That's a free speech area. They intimidated and threw you off when they had no right to. So that was really, Columbia was really the only one, though, at least in the last 20 years or so, that has done it. Because shockingly, University of North Carolina, we were there a year and a half ago during COVID, and things looked a little sketchy because we were only invited by one student organization there. We typically try and get at least 2 to invite us. And so we weren't sure. I know if we would have gone over to Duke, a couple miles down the road, we would have been stoned to death probably. Yeah. But UNC was actually okay. And it's crazy enough. You probably saw it, Vinny, and a lot of, Fox News and CNN all picked it up. Right when we got back, 2 weeks after we were there in the free speech area. And there was good buzz. There were a lot of secular liberals, atheists who came out and really grilled us, which was great. But literally 2 weeks after we got back, it went viral that I guess a lot of different professors wanted to start this free speech area right across from the free speech area that we were at. They wanted to start a free speech building and a whole department. And all the board of trustees were so against it. And so it just gets to the point that you're making where whether it's free speech or all these other narratives that so many of the universities want to shut down, it was so positive to hear at a school like UNC, which is so secular, that they were such proponents of keeping free speech open.
Yeah, now you would hope the slippery thing there is I've seen this, and it's like, well, free speech, we're advocates of free speech, like lowercase f free speech. Free speech as long as it aligns with our ideology.
True.
Right?
True.
Whereas free speech is supposed to be, the whole point was, hey, we need people to be able to say things that are uncomfortable and I disagree with vehemently.
Right.
And that's supposed to be okay.
Exactly.
And, and I hope, and I'm just, hoping that when they, made sort of that dictate of free speech, they meant the real free speech. Like, you can say some stuff that we don't really believe in, but that's the point,
Right.
Yeah.
And even some of these schools where it feels risky. So my dad and, our camera guy and producer, they're all very old school. They're all post 60, 65. And so they're always like, oh no, even though the crowds are still getting bigger and all this, you don't need to worry about security and that kind of thing. And I'm always saying, well, yeah, we don't need to be paranoid. That's for sure. But there's a reason why a lot of people do carry security now. Yeah. And so we'll have some level of security. We always have. And I just think we should probably augment it a little bit. But this is connected to the free speech piece because things do get a little hairy out there at times. And so now when I go to a university, I'll at least go the free, very low cost route of finding where the police department is or where university security is, and just give them a small email or something to give them a heads up, because we want that free speech. We want the healthy tension to be there, and yet things can boil over, probably, as you know.
Oh yeah. Especially with the you guys are sharing a Christian message, which is in 2023, that's, and on college campuses. You're going into the lines then, right? Like, there's a biblical reference. You really are. So I can, it's good to hear. Well, I guess I'll assume you haven't had any physical altercations yet, or any close calls, or
not, just a bunch of threats, but no, nothing. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, my dad had pies thrown on him. He gets spat on. A guy came out with John 3:16 on his butt cheeks, and he mooned the crowd. A guy did come out with a fake gun, and then some crazy costumes. But it was really only the guy with the fake gun, I want to say, where 10 security guards jumped on him within 10 seconds out of nowhere. And so that was the only really hairy one.
Fake gun. That's a good way to get killed, man.
Yeah, good point.
Wow. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think you're right. I think I think you'd be naive to think that you don't need security. It's just, just the world we live in. Folks don't. This message gets very personal, and there's all, I mean, I've watched a bunch of your content. It seems 99.9% very civil, and it does get tense at times, which I think is the point of a good debate, because people are, they're very faithful or not faithful, or they're tied to their ideas. So it's like it's tough to not take up as a personal, almost insult at times when you're hearing an idea that's contrary to maybe your entire worldview.
Yeah.
So you're shaking up their core worldview at times, and which is sort of the point. At least one of the many points you guys are trying to drive home. But so yeah, I think if you're doing your job, you're going to have some real tension, right? Otherwise, you'd be just having a happy-go-lucky kumbaya discussion, which we don't need any more of that. We need some hard, real discussions nowadays. So
exactly.
Yeah.
One thing I thought about this morning before our conversation was it's interesting how, and I hope this doesn't go in this direction too much, is we have such a large Christian audience now we're speaking to because of social media, that some of the angry atheists are actually getting a little intimidated. Because you'll have a few hundred, which I had no idea would happen. I don't want any kind of echo chamber or any type of tribalism to occur, where they'll come out and they'll still be those angry atheists, but they're not going to speak up because they're looking around saying, "There's 300 to 400 Christians here. That if I speak up, these guys are coming after our ideas, and then you're going to have people applauding behind." So that's the last thing we want. We love having a small nucleus of solid believers, especially to start the discussion to get the day going, but we hope that agnostics, atheists, Buddhists, Muslims don't feel intimidated by a Christian crowd.
Yeah. I have noticed that. It's funny you say that, because I preparing for this, I kind of jumped around to a bunch of your content, so I didn't put it in like a chronological order. But at some point, I did notice some of the videos I was watching seemed to have a circle of friends around you,
right?
Where they were asking hard questions, but the questions more like, perhaps a question maybe personally I would ask, which is like, "Hey, I'm struggling with my faith in this area, and I want your help," sort of thing, as opposed to a question coming from someone of a different faith system, or agnostic or an atheist who is truly, almost angry that you're preaching certain messages and ask those sort of questions. So I saw some sort of a divide between those, and I don't know when it happened, but it sounds like you I guess as things have been spreading, you're getting more Christians that actually show up to your Q&A, I guess.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, UNF, University of Northern Florida was a recent one. South Carolina University. We'd have a big crowd sustained for the most part throughout the week. But you're right; it was mainly Christians, and I'd have to kind of goad some of the atheists into speaking and asking questions and debating.
Yeah, you're almost like, this is not church. You guys are believers, great. We can do Bible study later, but we're trying to ask the hard questions of people that really need to hear some of the stuff. Yeah. It's interesting.
Right.
What are some of the? I mean, what is the sentiment on campuses? Are you getting? Again, I think when I'm watching your videos, I get a general positive sense. So even the folks that are the atheists, the agnostics, there seem to be just very intellectually curious and sincere. And again, I'm sure you have plenty of things that aren't all questions. Things don't come across that way, but generally, I saw it very positive, where people, you get this message that the universities are just turning to shitholes, and it's just Sodom and Gomorrah on every university campus now, and they're just pushing all the complete wrong values, and I think that's definitely true to some degree, because there's a lot of proof out there. But I was encouraged by the questioning, and even the non-believers and the people that almost maybe didn't want you there. They seem to be asking really good, sincere questions that maybe they were struggling with on some level, and they really wanted your answer. Have you noticed that, or is it all over the place in terms of like the sentiment of the student?
Yeah, just to make sure I'm getting your question, because it's a good. I want to make sure I'm getting it right.
Yeah.
Are you just saying in terms of the kind of questions or the kind of student, like how it's shifted, or?
Yeah. And I kind of went a little round in circles there, I guess. Are you feeling like generally the students are generally intellectually curious and want to learn from you, or are they just there to throw stone? Like, are they, are they just kind of like, yeah?
That's a great question. I would say for the most part, they do want some type of truth. Those who have been in the audience for at least 13 minutes, they genuinely want to learn something or to get a different perspective at least, or some of their blinders. My favorite thing out there is obviously to see somebody actually start to believe, or to see, say, for example, somebody start to get techniques on how to heal their own mental health issues. Those are my two favorite ones. But then my third favorite for sure is just to see some of those presuppositions and the straw man and the blinders start to fall off, where if they're out there for 15 minutes or so, it's, oh, wait, these guys aren't telling us we're going to hell for X, Y, and Z reasons. These guys are actually, I wouldn't say well-read, but they've read a couple books. And so it's not just this simplistic, hey, you don't think the earth is 6,000 years old, so you are clearly going to hell. So there, I would still say, fortunately, the majority are, for the most part, seeking some type of knowledge and truth that they hadn't known before. But it's probably, if you had to pin me down on it, it's probably 60-40. I'd still say there's a good 40% there.
Okay.
One adjunct professor came out this past year. What I love about my dad is he definitely has an ego. Especially it'll come out and say, the competitive sports field or something. But he is also tremendously humble, which is why I probably haven't lost the faith in some regards, because 75% of pastors' kids run away from the faith. And one of the main reasons is because they see their dads as being one person on a Sunday and on a Monday totally different, or one day, puffing themselves up spiritually and saying, oh, here's how spiritual I am, and here's my flock, and I'm spending more time with them than my kids. I've always seen my dad be so consistent in his character. Yes, he's a sinner, but so consistent in his character, and always tells me, look, if you don't have a healthy devotional life, and if you're not praying before you're teaching, preaching, debating, this is a fool's errand. And so it's fascinating to see him go out there, never selling books. Not that selling books is a bad thing in a setting like that, but never selling books behind him. But there's always students who are thinking, oh yeah, he's making money somehow. Look at the cameras, that sort of thing. And he's always lost money. He's never gained a dime. But there was this one university professor who stepped out, and this is just kind of more so to your question as well, with professors too. I see it just as much as, if not more so, we're just coming out there to not genuinely seeking. It's the whole piece on, I like that you brought up doubt, because doubt's one of my favorite themes. And you have the student and the professor who are out there who are clearly doubting, trying to look for truth. And then you have the others who claim to be doubting, but they're really totally closed off and just cynical. And this professor who was out there said, you are just out here for your own vanity. And he literally said it like 20 times. I kind of got nervous. I was like, are you stuck, man? Are you like a robot right now? I can promise you, my dad is not out here for his own vanity. Like, I'm sure that'll tie in, like maybe if he wins a debate or something, maybe his vanity will get involved. But I can promise you, I know for a fact, he did not take a 4-hour flight down here, missing out on all that we have back home, grandkids, etc., for his own vanity. And so, I think that professor probably walked away with some students embarrassing him, saying, no, you're probably yelling and speaking up and talking over people for your own vanity.
Right.
And so to your point, it's the majority, fortunately, probably about 60% are still want some type of knowledge and hopefully truth that they see is beyond just their truth and not just our truth. And yet there's still that large contingency of, no, we know exactly where we're going and we're closed off.
Do you get a common theme if you were to kind of zoom out and look at all I got 100,000 questions coming at us? Is there you just have to see categories of the same themes coming up that students are most interested in asking?
Yeah. And has that kind of changed over the years? It's
My
dad and I would have a different answer on that. He would say they're pretty consistent. I would say they're fairly consistent, but I've seen really 30 years ago, it was all about, is there truth? 20 years ago, it was, all right, fine, maybe there's truth, but what is that truth? And then today, it's all about, I'm in pain. Do you have an antidote for that pain? And
interesting.
A lot of that has to do with alcohol, deaths of despair, which is, you got alcoholism there, you got suicidality, you've got drug addiction, opiates, and then you've got the depression, anxiety, which come with it skyrocketing. I heard some crazy stat recently that on college campuses now it's 90%. I don't know if that's clinical, but 90% say they're anxious or depressed. And I think clinical is probably still around 60%. And so to that point, or divorce, it's almost, I think it's over 52% now. So many university students are in pain. And so often out there, they don't have a question. They'll find out that I'm a therapist and they'll want to come up to me after, a bunch of them will, and just share their mental health testimonies, stories with me. And so that's kind of new. I would say that's a big new one just in the last, 3 years. It's still growing like wildfire.
That's That's fascinating. So that's interesting. So so you said about 30 years ago, the predominant questions were sort of circling around, does truth exist? Does a single truth exist? Did I hear you right? And then it kind of morphed to what is that single truth? And people searching for it. And now it seems to have almost morphed to more mental health type questioning.
Right.
That is super interesting. I mean, because postmodernism sort of said, hey, it's we're in this new world now where truth itself, there is, the theme is, there is no single truth. If you believe it, that is your truth. And that, moral relativism is sort of I don't know if that's still the feeling of the day, but that's, for me, that's what, just following the breakdown of the traditional home, the traditional faith, and God being pushed out of, the public circle more and more, and whatever you believe is kind of okay. I thought that's where you would go with that answer. That's interesting that you kind of overlaid mental health as sort of the predominant theme now. That's so depressing in a sense. I mean, wow, interesting.
And with that is really interesting. I don't know if you saw that study. I want to say it was put out probably over a year ago now. That was on SSRIs and showed 85%, 90% are ineffective in terms of really making a difference on neurochemicals. And so as Christians, we could potentially take that and say, yeah, hey, look, it could be more of a worldview thing, this whole depression and anxiety piece, where where you have the serotonin reuptakes and they're not working as well. It's more of a placebo effect. And so maybe that's even a greater piece of evidence to look at all these mental health issues. Yes, it's multifaceted why it's increasing, but one of the main ones, statistically even, is a breakdown. Like you just said beautifully, it's the postmodernism where there's so much confusion. And with that comes a lack of moral absolutes. With that comes a lack of objective meaning and purpose. Why am I here? And we know that the number one reason why people will commit suicide is because they've lost hope, meaning, and purpose. So if you take that out, I mean, look, now you got a serious issue. So that's kind of another piece to it.
Right. No, you're getting exactly where I was going to go next. So if 30 years ago, the question was, what is this truth? Does a singular truth exist? That's an interesting philosophical question. And then it's like, well, we think there is a truth. Which one is it? And then, you fast forward to what we're talking about now, in the sort of the mental health being the predominant theme. Right. I would say there's a correlation there between, if we, and this argument, I have this discussion with friends and family all the time, and just strangers on the podcast too. It's like, whether or not Christianity is the one or not is one discussion point. But we do know, just all the mental health documentation points to it. When someone has faith, belief in something higher than themselves, right? They're in a better state mentally. It's something us humans need. We just absolutely need it. So the breakdown of that, to your point, I would absolutely think is a contributor to contributes to that mental health state 100%. Whether, again, separate conversation of is Jesus Christ the one or not, right? If someone has a belief in something higher than themselves, it does seem to make an immense difference on their mental health. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So no doubt there's a correlation there for sure.
When we were, one of our church founders, when we were building our building, which is actually now not our building directly, it's a interesting connection, but that was exactly what you just said. The statement that was made. It was, even though this isn't necessarily a church building and the church is connected, though, we know, however secular this building might be, that there is a component of faith and connection to people and relationships and community. And that, Dartmouth isn't too far from here, and they put out this big study, and then there was this landmark book that picked it up as well, talking about the number one way to have healthy mental health is to look, upward and outward. Upward connection to a transcendent source. They wouldn't say Christianity per se, but some type of God upward, and then outward in relationships. And that's what Christianity has given us in the West since the West's inception, which is to glorify God and to edify others. So it's interesting how mental health has always been in line with it.
Right. Yeah. It's something that does not get recognized enough. What you just said, I think, just looking at the United States, who founded on Judeo-Christian principles, it indirectly kind of kept us on the right path for the longest time. Yeah, there's plenty
Yeah.
of, there's plenty of, abuse of the system and all that, right? It's far from perfect, but that the degradation of that, and even folks that just truly never even really believe, they just were, they just, I guess, played the part, if you will, or they went along with the societal norms at the time. It seems to contribute to a better overall society regardless. Right. And I do think it seems to be just breaking down.
Yeah.
And it's a weird time, because you're right. I think, hearing you say that mental health on college campuses is the biggest sort of theme you guys get is, I don't know what to do with that information. Like, where do we go from here? I mean, is it, right. I mean, obviously you guys are trying to be part of the solution, but
we can't, oftentimes we can't do our thing on a Monday because they'll have a mental health day. And so whether that's a mental health day because somebody unfortunately died by suicide, or it was something in the calendar, we'll always show up and it'll be, oh, it's another mental health day on this major university campus. And that's
actual formal days they take off because of,
right.
And how much of that, it's probably piss some people off, but how much of that is just, can we just toughen up? Now, I'm in no way is mental health, am I poo-poo mental health? I've witnessed it in my family. It's a real thing, and it's debilitating, and it needs the proper attention.
Right.
But I don't want to do, I'm always worried about, diluting those that really need the help, that really have those issues, that really need the attention with them, a lot of other folks, I would say, that jump on that bandwagon and create this, and I always get into a little trouble going there, because there's, like, with any issue, there's true core folks that need the support for whatever the issue is. And then there's a whole lot of other folks that jump on a bandwagon and, in my opinion, dilute and take away from the true folks that are in pain. I always wonder with, like, mental health day. I mean, I don't know. It's almost like if you give something a label, you'll get a lot of folks kind of ascribing to that label, that category. So, what I mean? I don't know. Is
oh yeah.
What I mean? It's, I'm kind of a little unclear there, but when you see these mental health days, is the theme like, oh, gosh, the mental health day, or is it like, no, we really need this. Right. This is really helping. Like, what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know where, and I don't want to be insensitive. I truly don't.
No.
It's like,
I land exactly. I'm not kidding. I land exactly where you just kind of landed on that, which it sounds like you have a healthy little midway point there between, say, the Stoics on one side and then the snowflakes on the other.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I like that.
You go to the Joe Rogan Stoics.
Yeah.
And I would say to Joe, you don't know what you're talking about at all. I would say, Joe, he says, wake up and do 75 air squats and everybody should be fine then. Now he goes to some friends who are on Ativan and Xannies every day. And I would say, that's probably not too smart. They have some serious dependency there, and that can actually be very dangerous. Getting off, it can actually kill you. So I would say, yes, they need to get a better medical regimen. But Joe clearly has not dealt with schizophrenics and those who have bipolar disorders 1 and 2, or those who have major depressive disorders where you put them under an fMRI scan. Yeah. And the gray matter is clearly, there's a huge difference. I love that we have those fMRI scans now and how important they are. But at the other end of the spectrum, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't think it's insensitive to say, just like gender identity, unfortunately, right now, when I have counseled those with mental health and gender identity, and oftentimes those are comorbid, it's, hey, I'm hopping onto this bandwagon because my friends are doing it. And I've actually had people say that to me, whether it's, I'm going to become a woman for a stage of my life, or, I'm depressed and I'm going to become a cutter because my friends are cutters, and it comes off.
Oh, there's no doubt that occurs. To
exactly.
Some degree. There's no doubt.
And I'll flat out say to them, hey, I respect you and thank you for your honesty and vulnerability, but I would strongly encourage you. You could play off the authentic self piece. You'd be like, well, wait a second. I thought we were all about our authentic selves and living for ourselves in a way, and not buying into kind of the socialized type of, I'm going to assume another's position just to make myself feel better or to feel part of a clique. And that'll kind of be a head scratcher for them. Like, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to try it anyway. All my friends are doing it. So I love that's one of my favorite questions. And I would agree with you. I think a large portion of those, especially university students and under, need to get out of the victimhood of saying, one of the dangerous ones I hear all the time is, not all the time, but I've heard many times, is, hey, Dad, I have depression. I'm seeing my psychiatrist. I'm a 13-year-old. And if you don't let me out of the house, I'm going to kill myself in my room. And so that kind of thing just spills over, and it's not even a cry for help. It's just manipulation. So I do think that a lot of these mental health blues could be solved by something like hard exercise, 1 hour a day, or solved by a better friend group, going to church. I think all studies show that. But then I think the more significant ones, like I've had, you're kind of also, I think, touching on those coming from different cultures, say Hispanic culture or some of the Black culture, where there is more baggage behind mental health, saying, "Oh, just suck it up." Pills, definitely not. Even being honest, for a male, for example, saying that I'm having these crazy thoughts in my mind all of a sudden that I don't know where are coming from. Even voicing that shows weakness, and never do that. That increases, unfortunately, some serious malady and pathology within those communities. And for example, just lastly, is I was counseling this one woman who was almost catatonic. Like, I mean, was having a tough time speaking. And her husband, this was a long time ago, and they haven't been part of our community, so it's not breaking HIPAA, but her husband was going to an Ivy League school, very smart guy, but saying, you better not get help and you better not get on medication. And I had to give him an apologetic from the mental health perspective. And finally she got on medication, and boom, she went from almost catatonic to firing on all cylinders.
Wow. Yeah.
And so for someone with bipolar, for example, it's crucial to have that medical regimen.
Yeah. And it's especially now. I mean, the society where it's so complicated, and you want to not jump on just the latest new bandwagon. So you push back and you say, well, let's think about this. And even that has been labeled as, well, sort of hatred or bigotry. It's like, well, no. I literally love everyone. Like, would never wish the worst. Like, everyone should be accepted, and, all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't mean you have to just empower and normalize. Right? There's a line there. And as adults, shouldn't we just be able to ask those questions and have those real discussions?
Right.
And, man. So how much of that has come into your questioning and the stuff you guys talk about? Is a lot of the political issues, the trans issues, the gay issues, has that been a major theme, or are folks mainly just asking about the Bible?
Palestine, Hamas, I was shocked. It only came up once at our last
really?
The entire week. I was really surprised by that, kind of pleasantly in some ways. And abortion will come up a good amount, not a ton, but a good amount. Yeah, homosexuality actually is coming. That's making a turn again and coming up a lot more than it was, oddly enough, just 5 years ago. So that one's really coming back with a vengeance. And there's a lot of presuppositions behind that one. And so those that are more kind of politically driven, that are connected, obviously, biblically as well.
Yeah.
Those certainly are still quite apparent, but we like that it's not, those ones don't come up as often as slavery in the Old Testament. They don't come up as often as why does just God exist to begin with, or historicity for the resurrection, or any of those which we prefer.
Yeah, for me, it's more fun to stay away from the political stuff. It's just, for obvious reasons, but I don't know. It's just, it's hard.
Right.
But what are some of the hardest questions you've got? Have you gotten questions like personally where I don't know if I just picture you and your dad driving back in the car and going, and then you kind of sleep on it and go, man, that one threw me for a loop, and it almost, not going to say, well, maybe it shook your faith a little. Like, this question was so deep and so good. Let me dig into that. And it kind of shook you a little bit, where you didn't maybe have the best answer, or you kind of, you need to do more research, or, I don't know. Occasionally you hear some of the skeptics say certain things, and it sends, at least for me, it sends me down a kind of a rabbit hole of like, oof, that's a really good perspective. Why would that be the case? I don't get it. And it kind of hurts me to the core a little bit. You get some of those?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And the one that used to really get me was slavery in the Old Testament. Yeah. We've got the ultimate answer. Even though you have slaves obey your masters, Paul in the New Testament, I still, it's such an easy home run. Not only that the Bible is not pro-slavery, but actually is the best response to something like slavery. And that's why Wilberforce and all of them took it up and said, hey, this is the best way to fight slavery. And Frederick Douglass even. So the New Testament is easy for me, but the Old Testament does get hairy at times. And especially before I heard a bunch of the arguments, that was one, say 7 years ago, that really would rattle me. Now today it's more so, say something like vessels of wrath in Romans 9:22, or did God really create some who he intended to go to hell? or a question that I feel like should have rattled me for a lot longer than it has, is simply faith. What is true faith? Because I have a lot of Christians who even asked me that question today. Just this week, I had a few. Said, I put my faith, I got baptized a long time ago, but I don't even know if I'm really a Christian right now. And so that has, even though we could go through, obviously, the Roman road, or we could go through, the early creeds of what Paul talks about in terms of what is a true Christian. We could go through all those, but still there's a level of insecurity. And as one woman put it to me a couple nights ago, hey, Stuart, I have so much salvation anxiety. That has definitely been one it's like, all right. And my dad would say that's probably more a home run for him. But for me, it's like, I know the answer, but does it always jive intellectually and emotionally?
Yeah.
Those are a few of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Salvation anxiety. I like that. I like that. I think we all, yeah, and even generically defined, again, for even non-Christians, we Christians use the term salvation, right, more explicitly to mean a very specific thing. But I think everyone has quote unquote salvation anxiety for some reason. Everyone wants to know, what if I die tomorrow? What happens, right? Mm-hmm. I think Christians have a pretty clear answer to that, very right. clear. That's kind of the point. But it's interesting. Yeah, I think just as humans, we'd have life after death anxiety. Call it that. It's like
right.
It's just to genericize it more, but. Very, very interesting. Well, what I guess some of the questions that I kind of like ask my kids and stuff too, and they're in a Christian school, and to be frank, honestly, I do struggle. I want to make sure they get the complete picture on science, for example, and there's not, and I don't think the Bible is I think the Bible and science can coexist. I think sometimes some areas it gets a little, let's talk about this, let's think about it. So I sometimes struggle with that a little bit. And I wanted to ask you what, pretend like I'm a student on campus, for example, right? The Big Bang, the Earth being 14 billion years old, whatever, give or take. How does that resonate with the biblical worldview?
Yeah.
Kind of doesn't ish, or does, like,
yeah. So I believe in the Big Bang, and the Big Bang is one of the biggest reasons why I believe in God.
I like where this is going. Go ahead. Yeah. All right. Awesome. By the way, this is not rehearsed. To the listeners, this is not rehearsed. So I threw that matzo ball up there. I was hoping I didn't know where it was going to go, but all right. Very cool.
It's the whole idea of, if you slammed your door shut, there's going to be a Big Bang, and Vinny caused that Big Bang.
Who slammed the door? Right. Yeah.
His child did, or a friend.
Right.
So Einstein himself knew this, and cosmologists are more skittish about this one now than ever before emotionally, who are atheists, because all the science is out there now that the universe had a beginning. And so if the universe is not eternal, didn't always exist, well, then something must have started this whole place because it had a beginning. So there has to be something outside of space and time to create space and time. Space and time can't create itself. And so whether it was Einstein with his fudge factor trying to have this number he put into his equation, which Einstein, I thought he typically had good character, but that showed he had a little bit of malevolence in his character for at least a time being there in his science. But he came out and he said, look, I'm a deist at least. Some would say he was a pantheist, but he at least believed in some type of transcendence because of that reason, he said. And I think he was at least an agnostic, if not an atheist before that. And then after that, he said, there's a Big Bang, there's a start to the universe. I have to believe in something outside of space and time to create space and time. So the Big Bang has really helped my faith. It's one of my favorite arguments. It's the whole idea of, all right, look, Christians believe in a virgin birth, but atheists believe in a virgin birth of the universe. So we both believe in miracles.
Interesting.
And that started out our faith. So starting there, it's, it's so much of science, and specifically evolution. It all has to do with process, not origin. Yes. And origin is a metaphysical question that's philosophical.
Right.
And so anybody who says, it's becoming a joke in my mind, anybody saying now, oh, I'm a person of science, not God. There's so, like my kids would say that, and many kids would say it. But when I hear more so adults say it, I'm thinking, oh, man, what was that bumper sticker you saw not too long ago? And did you ever question that bumper sticker or follow up with any type of reading after it? Because even Richard Dawkins, even the most acerbic Atheists have backpedaled on these ones greatly, and especially the ones that are coming at you fastest and hardest from the Christian perspective that are the most convincing now are consciousness, mathematics, the problem why do mathematical laws exist, and then the whole fine-tuning argument that's only growing. So from a scientific standpoint, atheism is shrinking in many ways, even though there's still some good arguments. But how do you deal with something like the creative mechanism from an atheistic perspective when it comes to evolution? I do believe in evolution. I'm definitely micro, not macro, but I believe in adaptation over time. I believe we have a tough time with a lot of what we see in the violence of evolution. So why do we have such a tough time with that? C.S. Lewis would say, or Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, that Pulitzer Prize winning book written by Annie Dillard, a Christian. And her whole thing was, well, why do we have such a tough time with the evil that we supposedly see in evolution? Shouldn't we just, from a scientific perspective, and if we just came up out of red tooth and claw from an evolution perspective, shouldn't this just be natural? Why do we have such like a, whoa, there's something bad and even evil within evolution? And from a biblical perspective, an entropy breakdown, and I could get it. I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but I would go there. Those are a few arguments there, especially with the Big Bang, like you'd asked. And then I'd go to, all right, who started the modern scientific revolution? It was all Christians. It was all, and you can go back a little further even. You look at Galileo, you look at Kepler, Newton, you look at so many, you can go, the list is like 20 to 25, the biggest names, Hubble, that are all such strong. I mean, and then you look at, the Human Genome, head of it, Francis Collins, strong Christian, even an apologist. And then you look at these stats out of Nature magazine, which is they're so antithetical, obviously, Nature magazine to the Christian faith. And yet they're dropping these stats like almost half of Harvard med school doctors and scientists believe in a personal God. And so this whole idea of science being anti-faith, that fortunately is called the opposition model, and fortunately is being deconstructed and done away with quite quickly, where it's the whole science is anti-God, and it's actually more so that you need the two together.
Yeah. That's interesting. You said a lot of things there. You follow Stephen Meyer's work?
A little bit.
The intelligence of the cell, and I can't tell you, if you look at my Google searches and YouTube searches the past 10 years, there's a few themes. One of which is, one is how to better plastering techniques, because I like doing all the DIY stuff around my house. That's one stupid thing. But the other more, I think, more intellectually, I guess, stimulating question I tend to ask is always, and again, past 10 years, science versus God, or something like that, or like, can you be a Christian and a true science? Honestly, I feel like the trend, and maybe this is part of me wanting this answer, confirmation bias is a real thing. I'm aware of that, but I have noticed a theme where the more we figure out about the intricacies of our genome, the biology, the cell, the more we figure out that there's almost an impossibility how these things have became from what, have evolved from step one to step two. And that's kind of what Meyer's perspective has been, where the more we get into the cell, we keep opening up the door to entire cities, like manufactured cities with trucks, motors, and engines and things that there's, and I struggle with it a little bit, but he does an amazing job. And I encourage anyone, the listeners, to reach out to Stephen Meyer's work.
And Behe with the irreducible
complexity. Yeah, exactly.
I haven't looked at that a lot recently, but the I and everything, I think that's still pretty well in the scientific.
Yes. I actually have what's his name on Mike Levin.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think I've heard that last name.
So he's been doing work on the I don't know what you just said about that, but you reminded me with the
irreducible complexity.
Yes, exactly. And he's run experiments that just prove that. I mean, it just points to a designer. It points to mechanisms in place that could not have evolved, because there's no way they could have went from the initial stages to there's no benefit or reward for them to have evolved, to follow the normal evolutionary principles. It's just been fascinating. The more we dig into the cell, the more we dig into it, the more it points to a creator. And that, I know that's a bold statement, but when you really truly look at it, from a scientific lens, it's like, it breaks down some of the original claims of evolution. It really, really does.
Yeah.
So now maybe there'll be a new branch of evolutionary thinking, and that could be good too. But it does seem to, and as Christians, we're always like, yes, we kind of have that, yes, like totally, just like, and I know and I'm one of those guys for sure. But because you kind of rooting for what you want to root for there, obviously. But if we're being totally transparent, but it does, but it is just fascinating. It is that irreducible
another
complexity.
Kind of connected to that from the more of the philosophical scientific perspective is, I don't know if you're familiar with Alvin Plantinga.
No.
And he is the one, I want to say I think he's in Oxford, and he's with, oh gosh, what's the other guy's name? There's some big boys who are Christians out there at Oxford and Cambridge now. It's not the John Lennox. John's listed, he's more the mathematician, but there's some big philosophers who are really well known in atheist and Christian circles who basically have totally undone arguments like, why would a good God allow evil? And so that's not even an argument really anymore either. And that's one of the biggest ones we still get on university campuses. So I love when I get that one. I don't try and say right out of the gate, hey, this one's kaput. But it's tempting to say that because most of the atheistic philosophical community actually has surrendered on that one and said Plantinga and all these, Swinburne and all these other guys are right on it. And basically his point was connected to what you were saying, Vinny, is look, hey, from an evolutionary perspective, I have been slowly over time, obviously survival of the fittest is the key to it all. But going after truth is not connected philosophically to that. Now, you can try and make a connection, but basically atheistic philosophers are raising the white flag and saying, all right, from an evolutionary perspective, you're right, Plantinga and Swinburne. For our whole deal of focusing on, hey, why do we seek after truth and reason and rationality and logic? How does that make sense from an evolutionary perspective? There would have to be a big jump there to do that because the evolutionary perspective just gets after survival of the fittest and really propagating the gene pool. So that's a big one that's come about in the last 10 to 20 years.
So just to recap what you're saying, you're saying that the reality that we're chasing, always asking what is truth, searching for that meaning in truth, has no evolutionary advantage. So there's no advantage to doing that as a species over time. So that couldn't evolve, or that couldn't be present just because of evolutionary means and adaptation, because there's no advantage to it for survival. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah. And now that's a good point, because it's the second part two to that would be, how could you even explain that? Would you trust the mind of a monkey, or would you trust the mind of a computer that we're on right now, which would come about from just a totally unguided, blind process,
or just
it's that same kind of idea. Where do you get logic and rationality from an evolutionary perspective? So what you just said right there, that's part one, and then part two would be that one. It's such a large jump outside of what evolution is propagating that you would need some type of creative mind. It would be much more likely a creative mind to have given us that type of
And the Christian response to that, well, correct me, would be that, well, God instilled that in us because he wants us to seek him. Is that a really dumb way of? I mean, how would you?
No, that's really
fix
good.
That?
That's the Logos. John chapter 1. John chapter 1. All the Greeks during that time period would have agreed with the Christians in saying there's some type of transcendent, creative mind out there. We would have said the Logos. Yes, that mind actually became a human and punched a hole through space and time, and actually landed here on this planet.
Yeah.
And so the whole point there is, yes, to get to know that God of the universe who actually created us with the abilities to have a mind that can actually think about its thinking, to have abstract ideas, to seek after truth. Wouldn't that make a lot more sense than if it's just a random, blind, mindless type of evolution that occurred to give us these capabilities that, like you just said, would actually have no advantage. And that's why I love you have some of these atheists like Daniel Dennett who are gigantic, but they'll even admit that. They'll say, there was no ultimate, adaptation. In terms of adaptation, there was no advantage to it to get these kinds of things, and such a huge leap from the evolutionary process. And so he'll just say it was an accident, and it doesn't really make a big difference, but we know it does make a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. So our conversation sort of making an argument for a God, lowercase g, I'll call it, as opposed to just randomness, right? That's kind of where we're circling. Now,
Right.
you take the next step, and I'd say, Stuart, how pompous are you that your God, do you know the one of all this 3,000, whatever, I don't know, either 3,000, 4,000, I've heard numbers, belief systems and religions, you got it right? Like, how arrogant of you. And you know what I mean? I'm sure you've gotten that questioning. So I'm a 20-year-old with a hat on, walking through the quad, and I throw that at you and your dad. What's that response look like?
Just go out and get my Muslim friend, my Hindu friend down the street, my Buddhist friend, my Mormon friend, my Confucius friend, and just bring them into our conversation right now. And let me hear you repeat that statement. And let's see who is the pompous, arrogant one who's so exclusive. Because every
system has that. Right. Yeah. Every system has that position. Well, most exactly. of those systems have that position. Right.
Exactly. Exactly, Vinny. It's the whole blind man and the elephant, or it's the whole everybody's taking a path up to the mountaintop. It's the most exclusive, pompous one is the one who claims to be on top of that elephant, saying, "Hey, all of you blind men down there, just to let you know, you just got different parts of the elephant. I've got full advantage spiritually, total vigilance, that is total omniscience when it comes to all of this. And you idiots, you're pompous for saying, hey, I got the ear of the elephant here, claiming to be something else." So, it's the same type of, another parable would be if you're in a museum with a group of people and they all grab artifacts that clearly it's like a rope, it's like a rock, an ancient rock, something else. And then just you say, hey, those are all pieces of an elephant. It's like, no, they're clearly different. Now let's have a discussion and even a debate over why are they different. So it's a very, even though, if a kid were to ask that, or whoever were to ask that, I would partly agree with them from a Western perspective. But what they have to do is understand, hey, I need to start questioning myself here in my thinking, and where am I growing up? Because it's connected in my mind to a lot of people who say, hey, look, Vinny, you're just a Christian because where you grew up and the family you grew up in.
Right.
And it's, no, you're just a humanist. By asking that question just shows you're a humanist, and you're only a humanist because of where you grew up in. Yeah. And so it's the genetic fallacy that I'll hear connected to that exclusivity point. And we're all making exclusive statements, and some are more pompous than others. But a lot of it has to do with, I try and come back to that, even though I came back to that one, obviously with a lot of tongue in cheek and such. I try and come back to that one as humbly as possible, as quote unquote tolerant in the sense of how Jesus would define tolerance. And yet hopefully in a fairly razor sharp way, critiquing it, because that one really needs to be critiqued, because it gets back to your point of where we live in a very pluralistic, relativistic culture, where everything is supposed to be on equal ground and considered the same. And it's just like a few students who said to me, oh no, we're not going to debate ideas. We need to make sure we agree on everything before we even have a discussion. And I'm thinking, well, first of all, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
How is that possible?
Why talk? We're the same. We're sharing the same brain. Let's walk away. Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. Yeah. But so I guess we're kind of getting at the hour here. So I'll ask I think I put in my notes the heavy question at the bottom, and I asked Dr. Habermas this. Are you familiar with Dr. Gary Habermas's work at all?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I've seen some of his stuff on the resurrection. Really good.
Yeah, we got another episode coming up in a month or so here. He's been super busy, but he was such a cool guy to talk to last. I think it was 2020 when I talked to him last. But I asked him this question, and it's more of a philosophy question, I think, because maybe it's a Christian question too. But if you zoom out, you take Genesis to Revelation. Whether you believe the Bible's inspired by God or it's just a book a bunch of humans wrote, it's a freaking cool story. It's probably the best story ever told. It's the coolest story. I mean, it's just what a movie, right? Yeah. I mean, so however you look at it, but from a skeptic's perspective, so God creates all this, and you kind of said it earlier about maybe God or he created folks he knows are going to go to hell. He just creates them. It seems like sadistic, right? So I asked this question: God creates all of us humans, gives us free will, chance to accept, gives us the free will to accept him or not, knowing that many of us will, as he says, be cast to a lake of fire. However that can be defined, you can debate what that really looks like. But I would almost ask, why the experiment, God? Why do that? Why? It's akin to having a child on purpose to torture it for 80 years and then have it die as an old man or woman. You know what I mean? I know that's a really dark way to frame it, but just trying to speak for, just put it in real terms here. Like, why would, what is this? What is this? I mean, why would he do that?
I would start out saying I have no idea.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. If you had a clear answer, I'd be like, "Wow, maybe God reported to you." Yeah.
Finally, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
We had a guy come to our church not too long ago who's married to a pretty big celebrity, and he just said to us, he said, "You guys are some of the first pastors I've ever heard, and it's the most important answer to any question I've asked, who said, I don't know."
Yeah.
So
I've seen your dad say, he goes, "I have no idea." I saw him say that. I'm like, and I remember that little 5-handy thing he does, and I love it. So yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
So it's in a question like this, I don't believe any Christian should have some type of ironclad, overly confident response that is just a 5-pointer.
Right.
Oh, here it is. Get on board, Vinny. It's so easy.
Right.
No, we got to start out with I don't know. The alternative to that question, any alternative that I've looked into, is very weak, because like you said, that we all live by narratives. And as a therapist, this could not be more true than anything else I've studied or brought into my counseling office. Everybody lives out a life narrative, whether they realize it or not. And you need that meaning and purpose. You need some type of transcendent source in order to really flourish as a human being. You just have to have it. And you have all of it in the biblical story. But where it gets tricky is, all right, what do you do with hell and God being outside of space, space and time, and having omniscience while creating us and before creating us? Why would he set up the potential here for this to happen?
Right.
And so a few thoughts on that. One would be, well, there's always a risk when it comes to having a relationship, wanting a relationship. You have to have risk and free will in order to have love with somebody. There's nothing worse than the type of boyfriend or girlfriend who the other has left, and that I, being this type of jealous one who the girl has already left me, trying to impinge upon her free will and just saying, no, you have to stay with me.
Right.
We know that that's the opposite of love.
True love would
compelled
love. Yeah, this doesn't make sense. Yeah,
exactly. So that would be one. You have to have free will. There has to be risk involved in order to have true love. And God took that risk, gave us that free will in order to have love and to have relationship with him. And I don't see any other way to have done it. Pinocchio or any type of AI or transhumanism, there wouldn't be love. We can't be moist robots and have love with the creator of the universe. But in that, again, there's risk involved, because if we turn away from the ultimate source of goodness, that's going to be hell. So that's the first point. The second point would be, God is never casting us into a lake of fire. In the Old Testament, you definitely get God judges eventually. And usually it's after 400 years, for example, or usually it's after turning away 30 times, after he consistently comes back and says, I'm offering forgiveness. I'm relenting. And that's even the God of the Old Testament before the cross. And so you see grace throughout the Old Testament, despite a lot of the judgment you see. So in the New Testament, though, and specifically the book of Revelation, it bends over backwards to show that God is giving us fully our free decision, and that is love as well, to make the decision of whether to live with him throughout eternity or not. And if you choose the opposite of wanting the source of all goodness throughout space and time and eternity, if you choose the opposite, it's going to be evil. It's going to be hell, however you define hell. And so that leads to the third point, which would be Luke chapter 16, where you have the rich man and Lazarus. Look, the rich man, this is supposed to be the clearest understanding that we get of what hell is in the New Testament, and specifically with Christ. I can't think of a more clear kind of parable and story to set it up. And that rich man does not want to get out of hell. He does not. Yeah. The text clearly shows he has no name, because he was born a human being, died a rich man, lost his entire identity,
and wants to live for that money, it clearly shows that he's miserable in hell. But that identity lived out. It's kind of like born a man, died a doctor. I've lost my identity, lost my sense of self. I want to live for this forever, even though it's mainly making me miserable. And yet he tells his, he does not want his relatives to come here at the same time. So he sees how miserable it is. So it's that idea of, okay, love, free will, and ultimately it's God saying, if you don't want the ultimate source of all goodness and freedom and love, the opposite is going to be what you truly want. And C.S. Lewis hit it perfectly. It's that grumbling mood that grows and grows and grows in us to the point of we don't even know when we're grumbling. If that's played throughout eternity, well, that's going to turn into a living hell that's definitely not enjoyable, but you've lost your sense of self. So are you really going to want to come back to the source of all goodness and greatness and grace? And I think the argument would be, no, you're not going to want to come back to it. And you've made that choice. And by you making that choice, that's God showing his greatest form of love. And so landing then on Jesus Christ, literally God gave his only son to die for us so that hopefully we would not make that decision and to be saved.
Right.
And so what does it cost? What does it show ultimately that your God truly loves you? I think every other religion, there isn't anywhere near as great of an example as the Son of God dying on a cross for us. I mean, what greater love than this, that a friend lays down his life for a friend, a brother lays down his life for a brother. That's true love, goodness. He does not want anybody to perish. That's why we get over and over that verse in Scripture where he wants everybody to come to a saving faith, where heaven is heaven and hell is a place you don't want to go to.
Well, that was a deep one. I appreciate that.
That was deep.
Yeah, no, it's good. I appreciate you thinking through that and getting your head a little bit there. I've asked that, I usually summarize when I have these questions with folks. I ask that question because it kind of puts us all on equal ground. Like, hey, we might have different beliefs, but we all would have these existential questions of the bigger picture. It's almost like I like your initial response. I don't know. I have no idea. Like, and then
that's the best response.
Yeah. I was going to cut out everything you said and just end with, I don't know. No, I won't do that. I won't do that. Last question. I'll let you go here. Aliens, UFO chatter. What do you make of this? Now, obviously, this is kind of more of a softball. Our church actually did a little response to some of this, and it came up a while ago. And I'd be interested in what you think. When you hear all this chatter, first of all, do you believe it's real? And if it is real, how does that contradict, your biblical worldview, if it does at all? Or is it just demonic?
Right. Just getting quickly to, I feel like, a small theme in a lot of these questions, and you actually explicitly stated it earlier, this piece on doubt. Mark chapter 9, the father with the demon-possessed boy, and demon possession oftentimes we get in the Greek, even with Christ, was actually dealing with mental health issues. Kissed by the moon is the Greek term. And so the Bible did not have this crazy misunderstanding of it was demon possession every single time. So we don't know what exactly that was. It was probably a mix maybe of both. And I believe in demon possession today. I just believe it's very, very rare. But that one there, when Jesus says, just believe, and the Father responds with, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. Jesus is clearly showing there's no scolding or anything. Unbelief can be belief if you're genuinely seeking. Yeah. And so unbelief, that this is probably the toughest one I get on university campuses now, back to one of your questions, where people are like, hey, I don't know if I believe. Do I believe? It's like one step towards belief. You even doubting and saying, I don't believe. I have unbelief. You're believing. You have belief. Interesting. So to one like this with aliens, for those who allow this to cause maybe an unhealthy type of doubt, if anything, aliens could possibly grow our faith in some ways. I would say ultimately it doesn't really do much, doesn't take away or add, but it could grow our faith in the sense of, how are these aliens thinking through worldviews? Or are they not talking about, are they mute? What does it look like if they do exist? And so if they do exist, they would still come from something. I don't think they would pop up on any planet by chance or from some primordial soup. I'm guessing that there would be actually a process and an origin. So that would lend greater evidence for there being a God. I don't know what kind of God, but a God, and then we work through that. But it still falls on the reason why this one and none of the other really tough questions rattle my faith is because of exactly what you're doing so wisely, Vinny, and having Gary Habermas on. It all falls on the linchpin, which is, did the resurrection occur or not?
Yeah.
And I know he just wrote a book that's like 800 pages long.
Yeah, he's a maniac. Yeah. Well, that's it. You're right. He that's what, I remember speaking to him, and he really did. If I summarize, he's very complex and intelligent dude. And just if I could summarize our conversation, because we had a little conversation before and after we recorded, and he really, I took a breath after our conversation and said, oh, wait a minute. I think I went for a run afterwards, and it just kind of hit me like, oh, his whole point is if why he focused on the resurrection so much, because if that thing did happen, then what else do we have to worry about? The rest of this stuff is just distraction and just conversation pieces and all. But if that thing did happen, we're good. We are good.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? That was really, I'm just saying in a very, layman's kind of perspective, but you're right. That's kind of we can get distracted with a lot of these intellectual questions sometimes. I think they're interesting and fun, but they can, and I've heard people say, well, that's just, you say you go check logic at the door, and you hear some folks using that against you as a Christian, because you're like, oh, well, that you're just shutting your brain off when it's convenient. It's like, well, no, I do think there are some intellectual questions that can be just distractions, right? And you can go through kind of a steel man argument as to why that's true and all that, but I think they're fascinating regardless. But you're right. There is some element to, I think, that with some of these just strictly intellectual, conversations can tend to be distractions for but I've heard them. Thought I'd ask you them because they've come up. So, and the alien one's kind of a softball, because it's like, well, what do you want me to do with that? I don't know. Are they there? We haven't seen. I don't know. It's one big conspiracy. Who knows? So
it's just such a good, quick response. That's why I love Gary and all these other guys. There's more and more evidence coming out about it. It's just such a great, quick response to especially kids who say, talking snake, Noah's flood, Balaam's talking ass, on and on and on. Was there really one woman, one man, one Adam, one Eve? Was it? In any number of questions in the Old Testament, it's always back to, we'll land on the resurrection. Did the resurrection occur or not? And that's why a guy like Jordan Peterson, I've seen him speak in person before, and he's great. And I've seen him debate some atheists, and he made a fool of them. But it frustrates me so much where he'll honestly say, I'm a Christian, and I don't even really acknowledge that I'm a Christian, though, and I'm not even certain. Like, it's a very ambiguous response.
Yeah.
But I've heard him asked a couple times, well, have you checked out the resurrection, the evidence for it? He's like, no, I haven't. And I think there's something spiritual, and obviously there's some intellectual laziness, even though I feel like he's the least intellectually lazy person in the universe. Right. But there's something there where a lot of people who find Christianity so attractive just don't check out the evidence for the resurrection. And a lot of it lands like, Vinny, you put it well, where it's, am I going to have to check everything at the door there? But there's so much great intellectual evidence behind it. The early church, how in the world did that just explode? Was this just a crazy cover-up lie that occurred? All of those pieces of evidence are just so convincing to me. And if you land on, like, look, it's still a dead man rising from the dead. Like, are you kidding me? Like, what a joke. But you still have to go back to, but hold on here. You just said you do believe that a God exists. And it makes way more sense in this universe that a God exists. So hold on. You're saying this God can't perform a resurrection. Wouldn't a resurrection be peas for him to actually pull off? So it's a great one to land on.
But you've heard Jordan say he's a Christian. I actually have not heard him say, or because he's an interesting. I've been following him for years, but he's very. Yeah. I feel like he's on like the front door, but he hasn't stepped through yet. And like he's got biblical lectures, but I haven't ever heard him talk about faith in Jesus Christ as a savior. I haven't heard him even skirt around that specific topic. Have you heard him? Or
so what I've heard many different shades of it. Recently, he had on Oz Guinness, a buddy of ours, who's an apologist, but also a super massive intellect. He has him on his panel right now for these roundtable discussions that are up on YouTube. And he's a strong evangelical Christian. So that's interesting in and of itself right there. Secondly, he has debated for the veracity of the Christian faith. He's debated for all truth coming from the Christian faith. So not just that Christianity is true, but all truth comes from it. But then he said, I don't like the question when I get asked, am I a Christian or if I believe in God?
Yeah,
and then follow up on that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And he follows that one up with saying, the reason why I don't like it is because if I ended up having to say I am a Christian, then I'd have to live out this crazy type of lifestyle that I could never live out. So obviously he doesn't understand what grace is.
Yeah.
So I have not heard him say in the sense of, I believe in Jesus Christ, that he died for me and rose from the dead, and I am a Christian because of that. Yeah. I've never heard him say that, but I have heard him say so many different types of shades of, I act like a Christian. I do believe I'm sort of a Christian. So I don't want to put words in his mouth in the sense of, I believe that Jesus Christ lived and died and rose from the dead for me. And yes, so not that far, but gosh, does he does a lot of toe tapping of that line.
Yeah, it's like he's literally circling around like the cross, and he just all he had to do is reach out and touch it. But he just, I've heard him say, someone asked, "Do you believe in God?" And he, like you said, he kind of didn't like the question, but he said, "I live as if God exists." I remember that response. I'm like, okay, but maybe you're right. So he's just been an interesting character to follow, and I just love what he's doing. But well, Stuart, thanks so much. I know we went a little over. I appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate
Thank you, Vinny. It's fun.